All right, task 3. Task 3 is a little bit more than task 2, but not as much as task 1. But it's very important because this is the key piece. This is the assessment piece. You planned, you talk, now you need to assess. Assessment is actually probably one of the most important pieces. So it's going to be looking at and analyzing the whole class assessment, or for your purposes, the individual focused learners assessment. Analysis of learning and feedback to, it says 3 students because this is not from special ed. Actually, it might be a special ed handbook, but you're only working with 1 or 2 students. And then the assessment commentary. So what do you need to submit the task stream? Well, this is in the part 3 of the packet that you have. You need to submit work samples. What they want is actual samples of student work. So if you have students doing, completing, if you're using some worksheets to support what you're doing, I don't suggest you say, here, do these worksheets, and you sit back while they do those. That's very old school teaching in special ed that we don't do anymore. But there's plenty of work products that students produce during your lesson. Part of it going back to the instructional materials that you're going to use. If you're using graphic organizers, the students are going to actually complete a graphic organizer. That's a student work sample. All right. If you're using sentence starters, and they have to complete this, the sentence or write a paragraph based on that, that's a student work sample. All right. These can either be written or they could be video, because we know some students don't write because of their, if they have severe disabilities and they don't write, they have, let's say, autism spectrum disorder, and they're more on the lower functioning side, and they don't talk and they don't write. How are you going to submit a written work sample? So you could actually also submit a video of their work, of them actually doing work. It could possibly be part of the video that you submitted of yourself teaching, because I'm assuming it's going to be question and answering and student responding within that. This can only be 2 minutes though. And they want a 2-minute sample of student work. All right. There's some additional information of what they want and what they don't want for student work sample. You could take a look at that. And also for the video. So they want actual student work samples. Okay, maximum of 2 files. And it's really focused on, I think, one part of your, so you have 3 learning segments, is only focused on one of those learning segments. Okay. Then you also need to complete a completed daily assessment record. So remember, if you go back to the planning commentary, you had to submit a sample of how you were going to assess these students on a regular daily basis. So you were going to have some sort of data collection procedure. That could be either a data sheet, that could be a quiz, that could be something along those lines. But you're going to give it to them on a daily basis, and they want to see a completed one of those. So in other words, you're doing ongoing progress monitoring assessment. I'll give you an example, curriculum-based measure. If Yan should know what curriculum-based measure is. But curriculum-based measure is something that you can give the students once a week or once a day. So for instance, if you want them to identify vocabulary words, curriculum-based measure could be a set of 10 vocabulary words that they've never seen before, and they either have to match the vocabulary words to a definition, or they have to do a fill in the blank, or they have to verbally say, here's the definition, now verbally tell me what the vocabulary word is. That's something that you can do every day. It's something relatively quick, relatively easy, and it's your way of assessing if the student is making progress. They want 1 copy of that. All right. They also, you need to label it. I'll go through that in a second. Evidence of feedback. So evidence of feedback is simply, could be up to 2 files. Evidence of feedback written on the written form is that if you use, a quiz or if you use a graphic organizer that they have to complete, you're going to give the students feedback on that by actually putting comments on the actual piece of student work. All right? So if you think about it, the first file would be, here's the completed student work, and then this file would be that same piece of student work with your comments and feedback on that. What they did good, what they didn't do good. I wouldn't recommend just putting good with a gold star. A+, remember we used to get that in school? I used to love the big gold star. Has to be a little bit more in-depth feedback than that. Or you could provide an audio file of your feedback, verbal feedback to the student, or you can provide a video file of your feedback. If you're gonna do audio, you might as well just videotape it because that's audio and video in it. All right? And then finally is the assessment commentary, which is the other big chunk where you look at, where you actually answer those prompts, and it's no more than 8 pages of that commentary. So let's take a little look at what you need to do. Oh, like I kind of just described it. Let's describe it a little bit more in detail. So first thing you need to do is use baseline data, collect the daily assessment records, and final assessment to analyze focused learners' progress. For some lesson objectives, the final assessment record will be the final assessment. So at the end of your lesson, you should have a final assessment to see if they met the objective for that lesson, and that's what you need to submit and analyze, and that's part of the assessment commentary. So you'll see in the assessment commentary where you could talk about that. Submit 1 copy of a completed daily assessment record, something I just talked about. Select and submit 1 learner's work sample from the end of the learning segment for 1 learning target. Now, this is a confusing part sometimes because you have 2 learners, each student has 3 lessons, and based on those 3 lessons, they want you to use one of your students in 1 work sample from one of the lessons in order to be able to submit that. That's the student work sample that I was talking about. So you don't got to submit all of this work sample that both students did for all the lessons. You're going to just pick 1 student work sample from one of the lessons for one of your students. Okay? And you're going to submit that, and that's to help illustrate, that the students are actually meeting the lesson objectives. All right? You want to document your feedback, and you can either do that, like I said, in an audio tape, video tape, or on the work sample itself. Now, depending on the students that you're going to be working with, most likely you're going to be using the work sample itself to give that feedback, most likely. But it could be, a video component of that. You're going to analyze the evidence of the focused learner's understanding and use of targeted language and communication. So going back to the language demands, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second when we look at the rubric. And then you want to analyze the data, because you're going to be collecting data. Obviously, you're going to have, even though you're only submitting 1 daily assessment record, you're going to have multiple daily assessment records. And that is your data, that is your information to demonstrate that the student is making progress. So, kind of go over it really quickly. Student work can either be written or video. For 1 student only, it could be a test, an assignment, or you can actually use that video. Part B is the completed daily assessment record. 1 copy for each student. Make sure you label it that this is the daily assessment record for student 1 for lesson 1. Part C is evidence of feedback, and that's where you're actually providing, either written or verbal or video feedback of the student's performance on the assessment. It's not just, so remember we talked about when you're doing the videotape, if you're having, a back and forth interaction with the student and they're answering questions and, you're providing them some feedback and you go back a little bit later in the lesson and you check on it. It's not just that. It's, they provided a product and you gave them feedback on that product. And here's the assessment commentary. So let's take a little bit closer look at the assessment commentary. Again, eight single-spaced pages. The first prompt is analyzing focused learners' performance, and this is where you identify lesson objectives. B is describe any changes in the assessment that you made or need to make. C is if a work sample is an excerpt of a video from task 2. Instruction and engagement, engaging the focused learners, provide a timestamp reference here. So that's if you want to use a video clip, you have to say, okay, this is the video clip, 8 minutes and 42 seconds into the video is where I, provided, feedback on the lesson that I was given. If you don't use a video clip, you don't have to worry about that. You want to summarize each focused learner's progress towards the lesson objective. And this is, this is going to be, this summary can be presented as a chart or described in several paragraphs. So this is where some of this writing is going to come into play. 8 pages seems like a lot, but when 2 pages are already prompts, you only have 6 pages to describe what you need to. And although 6 pages might seem like a lot, some of the assignments that I've given in my classes are about 20 plus pages. So, part two is feedback to guide future learning. And it says refer to specific evidence of submitted feedback to support your explanations. So to go through in what form did you submit your evidence of feedback for each focused learners, and they give you some choices here. Delete choices that do not apply. So if you use a daily written directly on work sample, that's how you give the feedback. If you use an audio file, then you would indicate that you use the audio file. If you use the video clip, you would indicate you use the video clip. And then based on that, you're going to explain how the feedback provided for each focused learner addresses the individual strengths. So then you go in and you don't just say, okay, I gave this feedback. You go in and you talk about what the feedback is supposed to have done. So you want to provide some commentary on that. And then going back to this idea of evidence of language and communication, understanding and use. It says you may provide evidence of understanding and use of the targeted language communication in your video from task 2 and or through learner work samples. And then it says refer to examples in the clip or learner work samples. And here's the prompt for it. Explain to the extent in which the focused learner had opportunities to understand and use targeted and language communication demands. And they kind of give some examples of it, function, vocabulary, symbols, and other means to assess the learning task and to demonstrate learning. And next workshop is kind of going to go in a little, because that part is not, it's pretty clear, but it's still like there's a big focus on that. If you remember going back to that first graphic I showed you where it had planning, instruction, and assessment, and the student was in the center. If you looked in that outside ring, it was like the whole thing was like wrapped around this language demand. So they really do want to focus on student language and use of academic language. So we'll spend some time focusing on that next workshop. And then part 4 is using assessment to inform instruction. It's very important because you're getting all this information. What's the next thing you want to do? What they would really like to see, and this is going to really come through your sequential lesson segments, is that at the end of segment 1, you're going to get feedback from your assessment on those learning objectives, and how do you use that information when you're designing lesson 2. If a student didn't get certain things in lesson 1, you might have to revisit it. So for instance, let's say by the end of lesson 1, there was 1 or 2 things that the student didn't quite understand and didn't perform well on the assessment. You might have to go back before you start lesson 2 and rehash that or revisit that in the beginning of lesson 2. So do a mini lesson, do a refresher on that to make sure the students are getting it. And then within the context of that, you're actually going to do some questioning to make sure that they understand it. It makes no sense to continue to move forward in your lessons if they're missing key components from the lesson 1. And this is where you have a chance to explain that you have a chance to talk about what the students are learning and how you're taking that into consideration. Take a really quick look at the rubrics. So rubric 11 is looking at analyzing focused learners' performance. And the evidence that they're going to use for this is assessment commentary 1, evaluation criteria, and work samples. And the question that they have is, how does the candidate demonstrate an understanding of focused learners' performance with respect to the learning targets? So you have set your learning targets, and they're trying to understand, they want to know how you're demonstrating that you understand that they're how your students are performing. And what they're looking for is that each focused learner's, the analysis draws upon knowledge of each focused learner and focuses on patterns of the following. Each focused learner's strengths and errors, so you're looking at what they did well, but you're also looking at what they didn't do well. Because you learn just as much, if not more, from what the students don't do well, because that gives you information to do what? So if a student's not doing something correctly, what does that give you information to do?
To help them do it.
Modify your lesson for the next time you teach it. Goes back to just what I was saying. You don't want to continue to move ahead if they're missing certain points. Rubric 12 is looking at assessment commentary prompts 2A and 2B. The question is, what type of feedback does the candidate provide to the focused learner? So they're looking at specific forms of feedback, and it even says looks for specific feedback connected to the objectives. You want to make sure you're giving feedback that's connected to the lesson and connected to the objectives. Rubric 13 is using assessment commentary 2C, and it says, how does the candidate provide an opportunity for the focused learner to use feedback to guide further learning? Proficient performance would be, candidate describes how each focused learner uses feedback on his or her strengths in areas of need to adjust current performance / response as needed. 14 is looking at analyzing focused learners' use of language and communication, going back to the whole idea of language and communication. And last but not least, 15 is looking at how does the candidate use conclusions about what each focused learner knows and is able to do to plan next steps. I didn't write that. Somebody messed that up. That's an error right there. Is able to plan next steps for instruction. So again, it's taking everything all the information that you got from your lesson plan in the student progress, and using that to look at the next steps. And if you look at this one, I told you all three of them have some sort of connection to research or theory, loosely connected with research or theory. And remember, this is just proficient performance. Ideally, you would love to be here, but I want to kind of just, and we're going to break down the rubrics next time a little bit deeper to show the differences between emerging, proficient, and advanced. Should you shoot for advanced? Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to be the best you can, but you want to at least be proficient to assure that you're going to be able to, be evaluated highly on this. All right. I want to do okay. So obviously, here's the task tree. I don't know if I remember my email for that. Yeah. My computer is automatically saved. So I never have to. Okay. So, when you go into task stream, obviously, you know, this is Dr. Yawn, so he has a whole bunch of other different things. When you go into task stream, what you're going to see besides the special ed DRF, you're going to see TPA program. All right. So you're going to see EdTPA 11, special ed 2013. If you're already registered for student teaching next semester, you should have access to this. If you don't, you will. So do yourself a favor, check it out and see if you do. If not, I would say when next semester starts, if you still don't have access to it, let one of us know so we could speak to you know, Dr. Lewis, who's in charge of this, and make sure that you're in, because it's very important for you to be in. But once you're in, you click onto the EdTPA 11 Special Education 2013, and this is what you're going to see. Welcome, yeah, blah, 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 get started. The important parts are this. Here are all of the areas, tasks, and parts of things that you need to submit. All right, it's over here in this column right here. And if you see task 1, part A, context for learning information, if you click on that, you're going to see a couple of things. First, you're going to see directions. Obviously, be sure to review these directions and look at the handbook. It's going to tell you once your work is completed and you've saved it to your computer, this is what you need to do. Both of you submitted on task stream before, right? So you know how the whole submission process goes. You start here, you attach it as like you're doing something to an email. You have to see the submission process completely through. You have to see the whole thing completely through and get a confirmation to make sure that it's actually submitted. All right. There's some files that are attached. This it's basically a history of revisions. I kind of don't know why it's here, but it's here. You can take a look at that if you want, but it's not going to give you anything special. All right. The EdTPA Special Ed Context for Learning is your template, the template that I showed you in the presentation. So we're opening it up. Of course, it's going to take forever. Okay. Not okay. Okay. Enable editing. So if you look at this, this is exactly what was in the presentation as your template for the context for learning information direction. So you download it just like I did, and this is where you put all your information. Once you have it completed and you think you're happy with it, or even if you start it and it's not completed, you can save it. I suggest come on, get out of here. Don't make changes. I suggest that as soon as you download it, you save it to your computer. Save as whatever you're gonna save it as. EdTPA Task 1 Part A. All right, and then you fill in your information as you go, or you fill in your information as needed. Okay, so that's gonna be like how most of the things are. Okay, you'll see something like, so this is the context for learning. The evidence chart is what you have. I gave it to you in your handout, and that's the first thing I showed. What needs to be submitted to TaskStream, and that is. I have no idea why I closed that last document, because now it's going to take forever to open back up again. I should have learned that from my computer downstairs. So it's the evidence chart. And it's, you don't have to fill anything out here. It's just telling you, it's showing you what I showed you already. All right. And last but certainly not least, in every single task and part is a link to your very, very trusty PDF on here? Has to be. If this isn't open because there's no Adobe on this computer, then trust me when I say that this is the handbook. All right. So the handbook, so you'll have access to the handbook. The handbook is something that I suggest between now and the beginning of next semester that you download and you start trying to digest. Okay. Part C doesn't have any templates. I mean, Part B doesn't have any templates to it. But you need to upload those files. I believe that's your support material. No, it's the oh, it's your lesson plans. This is where you upload the lesson plan. Part C is the instructional material, and then Part D is your data collection procedures that we went over, and Part E is your planning commentary. Now, your planning commentary does have a template. And it's special ed planning commentary. All right, that's where you download that template, and that's where you respond to all those prompts, and then you upload that back to here. All right, and then it goes as follows. Task 2 is where you would upload your video clips. Task 2B is your instructional commentary, and here's the template for that. Task 3, Part A, is where you would upload your student work samples. Task 3B is where you upload your completed assessment record. Part C is where you upload your feedback, and then D is the commentary, the assessment commentary. All right. A couple of things, really quickly, if you want to see. The evaluation method is the rubrics. So if you click on the evaluation method on any of these tabs, it's gonna say assessment, rubric, blah, blah, blah. If you click on view rubric, it's gonna bring you here to this rubric. All right. And this is all of the rubrics, so it's not just the one for Part 3, it's not rubric 15. So this is rubric 1, 2, all the way through 15. All right. So you can go to each tab and see what the rubric is for that tab if you need to. And that's kind of it. I mean, as you continue to move through this, these are the parts. If you want to view it as a folio, you can do that. It doesn't really necessarily matter how you view it, just as long as you're attaching and uploading everything here. So that's task stream, and that's wouldn't call it a brief overview of EdTPA, but it's an overview of EdTPA, even though it's not as detailed as you're going to get. The next workshop will get more detailed into some of the specific parts and specific things that you need to do, as well as provide you with some more material to help support you through it. Do you have any questions for me or for us, the faculty? I mean, I know it's a lot. Listen, trust me, it's a lot. It's a lot to digest. But that's why we're here, and that's why we're going to continue to have these other workshops to help you continue to digest it. But if you have anything like specific or even general that you want to ask us now, Yes, sure.
We have to do the 3 to 5 lesson plans?
Yes.
Is it for one student or?
That's a great question. From what we know at this point, it's going to be for 2 students.
Okay.
So you got to do 3 lesson plans for each student. Now, I'm not 100% clear on if you need to submit all 3 lesson plans for each student. But if you only work with one, you have an option to only work with one student, but you have to have a good rationale or a good reason for only working with one student. Okay, so that's something that we're going to try to clear up as a faculty before your next workshop, because in some parts of the handbook it says yes, you need to upload all the stuff for 2 students, and then other parts it's like, well, you might be able to only use 1, and I mean, to me, I think it's a little bit extra to have for both, but If that's what they require, that's what they require.
Okay.
But we'll try to clear it up before you start, we'll try to clear it up, okay? Any other questions or comments? Well, we appreciate you coming, spending your Saturday morning with us. Hopefully this was informative and hopefully at least get you on the path of thinking about what you're gonna need to do next semester. It's a lot of stuff, but it's definitely doable, and the more you understand it, the easier it will be. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any as we go through the process, and be on the lookout for an email. Even check your junk email, because apparently that's where it's going. Check your junk email for the date for the next workshop. Was supposed to be March 1st, but we're not sure, but it might get moved up. All right, so just be aware of that. All right? All right, thank you for coming. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.